Okay.
I'm Gordon Clayton, although I never actually worked in the voluntary sector until lately as a volunteer. I worked for Youth and Community, which became Community Education, which became Community Learning, and our ethos has always been to work with the voluntary sector and in some ways help extend the voluntary sector by creating new groups. It was both cost efficient and one way of getting new services without being a burden necessarily on the council.
I'm Alasdair Mathers. I grew up in the voluntary sector, and then my father was a voluntary sector youth and community worker, and moved around with lots of temporary jobs that he had in the way that the voluntary sector has temporary contracts from place to place. My first jobs once I qualified as a community worker were in the voluntary sector, first with the YMCA and then out here in Midlothian with the setting up of the Medica project in Mayfield in 1983 or 4 or thereabouts. And I've been involved on and off with the voluntary sector. I became the Regional Council's Voluntary Organisations Development Officer for 5 years in the days of Trafficking Street, Region's headquarters for education. And then in Midlothian I've been involved with partnership working with the voluntary sector as the community planning manager for the area. But I'm also like Gordon, a volunteer, and my own particular volunteering has been around the world of local music, and I'm a member of a brass band in Pennycook. I've been since I was 14, and I was a volunteer in setting up the charitable status of the youth band, and I'm on the management committee of that, so I'm a volunteer involved in a community group locally as well. I think from my perspective the band I play in was a paper mill band, and not as many people think a mining band, but it was certainly very closely associated with one particular heavy industry, Pennycook being the paper making town for Scotland from the 18th century onward. The band there was actually, as most brass bands are, a reflection of a heavy industry culture where brass bands went with heavy industry. When I arrived there in 1973, coming back to Scotland from another of the part-time and another of the temporary jobs that my dad had to another temporary appointment up here, it was the end of the paper making, of the large-scale industrial paper making in Pennycook. All that was left was a specialised mill at Williams Somerville's in Auchendinny. But the band, when I joined it as a 14-year-old, was full of people, of men mostly, and those men had worked in the paper mills their whole lives, and there was a very close association between heavy industry and the brass band world, which is why Midlothian has so many brass bands, because they all go with either a pit or a mill or some other form of heavy industry. So I've had a bit of involvement with that, about community groups arising from heavy industry. 1835 our band, and so it's the oldest community music group we know of in Midlothian, and the second oldest continuously existing community group in Pennycook. Certainly the only group that's older is the curling club that was founded in 1815. So it predates us by 20 years, but we're one of the oldest brass bands in Scotland, so we're very proud of that.
I think more recently, although I wasn't directly involved, people that were working in community learning were involved in supporting Lone Head miners' welfare to extend, if you like, the miners' club to having a community wing, again with funding from external sources, and that project seems to have gone from strength to strength. And